Okay. This is worksheet number 1, dealing with the respiratory system. So, I know you guys know that because you have it right in front of you. Anyway, let's not spill coffee. Okay, so the first one has to do with matching the vocabulary within the respiratory system because we need to understand how respiration works, so to speak. So the first one is internal respiration. And this occurs within the body, inside the body, so it's internal. So let's just click this, that'll work. So your body cells are going to be in green. So these are your body cells, and this is your blood. So gas exchange between your blood and body cells is internal respiration. And I believe this is at the beginning of her PowerPoint too. I think I came to this lecture. External respiration occurs within the lungs, and it's between the lungs and the blood. So gas exchange between body and blood is internal respiration. External respiration happens between the blood and the lungs. So I'm going to draw a lung, I guess. Oh God. This is bad. So this is external respiration. It's just the gas exchange happening between it. The next one is pulmonary ventilation, and this is the movement of air in and out of the lungs. So pulmonary ventilation is when air moves out of the lungs and into the lungs. So this is kind of the gas exchange between the lungs and its environment. This is pulmonary. Whenever you hear the word pulmonary, you think of what? Lungs, yeah. Another thing too, cellular respiration. This is the use of oxygen and the production of carbon dioxide from the cells. So we're going to jump back over here to the body cells, and the cells, when they actually breathe, so to speak, that's called cellular respiration. And this is when carbon dioxide and oxygen is transferred between, just when it's produced and when it's obtained, if that makes sense. So kind of like how we eat and use the bathroom, the cells kind of eat oxygen and excrete carbon dioxide. So, and then respiration is just breathing. So if you put it all together, the entire process is known as respiration. When air enters the lungs, it undergoes external respiration, and gases exchange between the lungs and the blood. And I'm just reading right off this. Actually, we'll start over here. We'll start with pulmonary ventilation. So all this is breathing. All this is respiration. Pulmonary ventilation is when air goes into the lungs and out of the lungs. External respiration occurs when air moves from the lungs into the blood. And internal respiration is when gas exchange happens between the blood and the body cells, because that's where we're trying to get the oxygen to. So something as simple as breathing is a lot more complex. So same thing with peeing. I mean, peeing is amazing when we get into the urinary system, but yeah, right. So that'll be fun. That's my favorite one. So is the urinary system, which is odd. And then when the cells take oxygen in and metabolize it, the actual process of using oxygen and then getting rid of carbon dioxide, not just between the blood and the body cell, but the cells actually using it, is cellular respiration. So that's that. Let's see. The respiratory system functions to provide the body with oxygen and eliminate carbon dioxide. That's because our body cells really depend, I don't know if you can see, our body cells really depend on oxygen to, I don't know if that lit that up. I'm trying to see if it works on the computer. Because body cells really need oxygen in order to metabolize and to work. Kind of like how we need to eat, your body cells need to eat oxygen. And they need this, your cells need this for ATP, which is also known as energy, yeah. So when the body cells get oxygen, they can be able to metabolize it and form ATP, which is energy. And yeah, that's pretty much that. And then carbon dioxide is, again, a waste product. So it goes from the body cell to the lungs. And we don't want carbon dioxide in our body because too much of it is a waste product. And yeah, we don't like waste in our bodies. So that's how that goes. And this is just rationale. Something else too is carbon dioxide is an acidic substance. So our bodies are naturally alkaline. And we like to be alkaline a little bit. But if you have too much carbon dioxide in your body, your body doesn't like that. It doesn't maintain homeostasis well in an acidic environment. All the enzymes and the nerves and everything cannot function in an acidic environment. So that's why we like to get rid of carbon dioxide. So now we're just going to go over the portions of the respiratory system. So if you look at worksheet 5, it's just asking you to label, the upper respiratory tract. I'll pull it up. So we're going to go over this really fast first so that way we can get through the rest of it. So let's see. Let's do this. So this is how it's labeled. Your respiratory system is divided by pathways and also tracts. So the tracts just depend on the anatomy of it, the structure of it. The pathways more so depend on the physiology, like how the respiratory system works. So if you look at these pictures, we're just going to go over the tracts first. The upper respiratory tracts, again, are like the anatomy, the structure, and whenever you think of the respiratory tracts, you can think about it in terms of infection. Where's the infection located? Location, anatomy, structure, that kind of all goes hand in hand. So your upper respiratory tract consists of your trachea, your pharynx, your oral cavity, your nasal cavity, and those are where you get your upper respiratory infections. Something here that I think I need to correct. I believe in your notes, the larynx is actually a part of the lower respiratory tract, so you might want to make a note of that. I classified it up here, but that was my mistake. The lower respiratory tract, though, consists of the lungs, primarily the bronchioles and the bronchi, the diaphragm, because the diaphragm is the main muscle of breathing. So that's the tracts are the anatomy. And then there's the two pathways, which is the physiology of breathing. There's a conduction pathway and the respiratory pathway. And do you guys know the main difference between conduction and respiratory? Just looking at these structures, take a shot in the dark. What is the difference between the respiratory pathway and the conduction pathway?
So the gas exchange explains some of that.
In the respiratory pathway, all of these structures, gas is exchanged. In the conduction pathway, you just have pretty much air just sitting. Yeah, it's just moving. It's moving, it's transporting, exactly. But in the respiratory pathway, that's where we're actually exchanging gas. So if that makes sense, because you have to be able to move air. That's the physiology of the conduction pathway, and you have to be able to exchange that air between the blood, and that's part of the respiratory pathway. So, makes sense? So when we go through this, just kind of keep that in mind. This will hopefully make more sense. So, what is not a structure of the lower respiratory tract? So looking at that picture, a structure that is not part of the lower is the pharynx. The pharynx is more of the upper respiratory tract. However, the larynx is part of the lower respiratory tract. So make that point clear. So I think I tried to trick you by rhyming pharynx with larynx, I don't know. But the bronchial tree, trachea, and lungs are all in the lower. Oh, sorry. So going through this now, number 4, this statement says the conduction pathway, that's what you're going to put in the blank, transports air between the atmosphere and the lungs. There's no gas exchange here. The anatomy of the conduction pathway is just smooth muscle, cartilage, and the cell structure is pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. So it's kind of thick, right, in the conduction pathway. But when you get down to the respiratory pathway, there's no cartilage, there's no smooth muscle, and there's no pseudostratified epithelium. It's actually simple squamous. So it's very thin, and you need to have it very thin in the respiratory pathway in order for a gas exchange to happen, because gas can't cross cells that are thick. So yeah, so that's kind of why that is. Another thing too is conduction pathway doesn't have any alveoli on it. All right. And there's more there. You'll have that when I send it out. So gas exchange occurs in the respiratory pathway, starting with the respiratory bronchioles and ending with the alveoli. And there's only three or four structures in the respiratory pathway, and this is the respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs, and the alveoli. So just a couple. So if you just remember those, then you can just remember everything else is in the conduction pathway. So just remember those four for the respiratory.
One more time.
The respiratory bronchioles, alveolar ducts, alveolar sacs, and the alveoli. So that's the anatomy of conduction pathway versus respiratory and upper and lower tracts. So now we're going to move on to the nose, which is, because this whole worksheet is pretty much like the anatomy of respiratory system. Passageways in the nasal cavity are called meatises. So if you see the word meatus, it's talking about the nose. And within these meatises are olfactory receptors. And olfactory receptors, since it's in your nose, is responsible for smell. So if you see the word meatus or you see the word olfactory, it's referring to your nose. And olfactory receptors are kind of like your nose hairs, how you can kind of, smell. So that's kind of cool, right? And then in your nose is also mucous membranes. These line the sides of the meatises, and mucous membranes are really important because they moisten, filter, and warm the air you breathe in. So it kind of like, that's why you need to blow your nose to get that stuff out, because it catches all the bad stuff that you don't want in your body. So you got to blow it out and get it out. And then again, inside your mucous membranes, you have pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. Do you guys know what that looks like? Yeah, it looks double layered, but it's not. And then what's another thing with it? What's another factor?
Goblet cells?
There are goblet cells, yeah. They're elongated, right? But the thing is, so they look, yeah, you were right, they were elongated. But the thing I wanted to point out is, you can't really see this, but they have cilia on the top of them. And that's the really big thing, because what does cilia do? It pushes, yeah. So in your nose, what your cilia does is it pushes your mucus out so you can blow your nose. And then when it's in the cilia in your lungs, because you also have mucus down there, the cilia push the mucus up your lungs and throw it into your esophagus, so you can swallow the mucus and everything in your lungs, and your stomach can like dissolve and digest and kill all the microbes that could be in your lungs. So it's a defense mechanism. And this is also another thing why smoking is like awful for you, is because if you it goes away. If you smoke, the cilia will be destroyed and you're not able to get that mucus out. and get that bacteria, so you'll get sick a lot more. Yeah. There you go. So I mean, it can also lead to like lung cancer and all sorts of things, but it's yes, and all sorts of cancers actually. But I'm not going to get into cancer. We'll stick with this. Um, and then again, yeah, goblet cells are also within the pseudostratified epithelium. So number 9, can you guys see this? Okay, I can zoom in maybe. Yeah, zoom in. Here we go. Hey, it's really big. Yay. All right. So yeah, this is where you were talking about goblet cells. So next question, cilia. I think you can see it a lot better up here too. Yeah, hey. Okay, I'm zooming in from now on. So cilia in the pseudostratified ciliated epithelium sweeps mucus, and mucus has trapped microorganisms in it. Microorganisms are like germs, so mucus traps it, but the cilia sweeps it toward the pharynx to be swallowed. And then when you swallow it, it goes down your esophagus and to your stomach, where they are destroyed because of all that hydrochloric acid. So that's nice. Cilia is awesome. Since Janet likes to ask what is false, I guess I'm going to add a lot of those in here too. It did?
Yeah.
Nice.
Those are the only ones I have problems with. Because
Which one of these is false?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you planning on taking advanced anatomy? There's quite a few of those. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's a phenomenal class. I'm not going to discourage anybody from taking it, but you do have quite a bit of which one is false, which is good though, because when you get in the nursing program, you have to think critically, and it's just preparing you. So it's hard, but I think it's worth it. Oh my goodness, yes. So what is false regarding sinuses? So we're going to go through the first true one. Sinuses do function to aid in resonating speech, so that's why you talk like this. If your sinuses are like clogged, or if you have you're having allergies, and it's just not fun. You sound funnier when you're sick. Sinuses are the ethmoid, sphenoid, frontal, and maxillary air-filled spaces. So I think you have a picture in your textbook where you can see where those spaces are. And then sinuses also function to reduce the weight of the skull. Because could you imagine if your skull was completely bone? I mean, you would be like really, like just really heavy, just rolling all over the place. The false statement is sinuses function as a source of speech. The larynx produces voice. Sinuses only like resonate it. So that's that. The next portion of it is the pharynx. And there are 3 portions of the pharynx. There's the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. So the nasopharynx is basically like the portion of the pharynx that's just like your nasal cavity and your nose and everything. Your oropharynx is like your mouth. So think about oropharynx, oro meaning like oral, meaning mouth. And then your laryngo is kind of like think about it like your throat. It's more of that area. So the nasopharynx, hopefully only air is passing through. The other ones, air and food passes through. So, yeah, we don't want food in our nose. I'm not sure if she's going to ask you about cartilage. Has she said anything about cartilages? No? Okay. Well, this is here for the anatomy, just for reference if you need it. But there's 3 cartilages, main ones, in your pharynx, and those are your thyroid cartilage, which is kind of like also known as your Adam's apple. So it's the largest amount of cartilage. There's a cricoid, and this is below the thyroid cartilage. And then there's your epiglottic, which is part of the epiglottis. And the epiglottis is the flap between your esophagus and your trachea. and it kind of dictates like where food goes and where air goes. So when you eat something, it closes your trachea so you can get it into your esophagus and actually eat, because you don't want food in your lungs and you have like pneumonia or an infection or something. That wouldn't be good. And then you don't want air in your stomach, so the epiglottis functions to cover the esophagus whenever you breathe and get air to your lungs. So that's the epiglottic part. The epiglottic cartilage is part of that. So those are the main ones. So if you see thyroid cartilage, cricoid, or epiglottic, that's just 3 cartilages of the larynx. Another thing too about the larynx is that it consists of true and false vocal cords. So true vocal cords are ones that actually make noise. False vocal cords just look like vocal cords, but they don't actually make noise. So they're called false. Muscles in the trachea is known as trachealis muscle. And this muscle functions because if you can feel the front of your throat, you feel the C rings of your trachea, and the muscle just functions just to connect that, because we want that connected. Another thing too is whenever you're taking a test, if you ever get a question about which one is in the front, the esophagus or the trachea, it's the trachea, because you can feel it. So there's that. And something actually pretty cool about the trachealis muscle also is, so your sympathetic system, this is your stimulus, your fight or flight, right? When you get into that fight or flight mode, you're running from a pack of lions, your trachealis muscle actually dilates, the diameter of it increases, and this allows you, it opens you up, which allows you to exchange gas a lot more quickly. And then we breathe faster, right? Why do we breathe faster? To make more energy, to make more ATP. But yes, you were right, to supply more oxygen to our body cells, because we need ATP, we need energy to run from those lions. So that's why you breathe faster. Yeah. So sympathetic stimulation, this dilates. Let's go to number 15. Now that we're talking about, we're going down the respiratory tract, structure by structure. Cartilage disappears in the bronchioles. This is true because cartilage is then replaced later on by alveoli. So in your lungs, it's more spongy, while by your trachea, you have cartilage. You have cartilage up until your bronchioles. So that's that. Just kind of know how the structure of each, know how the cellular structure of each respiratory structure changes, because that's important. I think that might be a question, actually. And then the trachea, this 16 is false. The trachea does not have hyaline plates. It has C rings. Hyaline cartilage plates are in the bronchi. So if you've read about hyaline cartilage C rings, there's different kinds of cartilage, and this changes based on the structure and the location. Does that make sense? Okay. I know this is kind of like the anatomy, so this is like facts. Remember this, facts. So this is like boring portion for me. This is a bonus question, but it's really not, because it's question number 17. The esophagus consists of cartilage. This statement is false. Your esophagus is a muscular tube that the digestive system uses. And what is that muscular movement called when you swallow? What is that? Well, peristalsis, right? Yeah. So your esophagus has to be muscular for peristalsis to happen, but your trachea has to be cartilage, because your trachea has to be supported. You have to be held up. If your trachea was muscular, then it would collapse, it would fold, it would kink up, so to speak. So we don't want that. So we have cartilage. Lucky us. So that's that. Going down further going down the line, gas exchange, this is a statement, gas exchange occurs in the terminal bronchioles. This is false. In the terminal bronchioles, there's no gas exchange. It is the respiratory gas exchange that, the respiratory bronchioles that gas exchange happens. So this is going back to the respiratory pathway, respiratory bronchioles, respiratory pathway. Goes to your alveolar, I think next is your alveolar ducts, and then something else, and then your alveoli. So, I'm sorry. Coffee's not kicked in quite yet. So, but yeah, so terminal bronchioles does, no gas exchange happens there. Next statement, talking about the alveoli, there's no smooth muscle. This is true because if there was smooth muscle in your alveoli, then you wouldn't have that simple squamous. And you want that simple squamous. You don't need muscles in your alveoli. Why do you need muscles there? It doesn't make any sense. So there's that. So 20, bronchodilation increases gas exchange, while bronchoconstriction decreases gas exchange. And this is true. Broncho, talking about your bronchioles, and then dilation, meaning that they get bigger, they open up more so you can breathe. And then constriction means it gets smaller and it closes up. So that's just a term, like if you're reading, hopefully that kind of like registers. And you may already know this, but it's just here just in case you don't. 21, oxygen diffuses through the alveoli into the blood, while carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood to the alveoli, because our body cells want to take in oxygen and they want to get rid of carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide go back to our lungs and we can breathe it back out. So that is with that. Those fill in the blanks, pretty straightforward. The next one has to do with the structure of the lungs. The right lung has 2 lobes, while the left lung has only 3. This is false. Yeah, vice versa. Yeah, you're going to flip this. To make this statement true, you just cross out, you just turn it into the left lung has 2 lobes, while the right lung has 3 lobes. And this is because our left lung has to be smaller to make room for our heart, because our heart is kind of positioned on the left side of our body. So whenever you say like the Pledge of Allegiance, if you have trouble figuring out which one has 2 lobes, the one with 2 lobes is the one that also has your heart in it. So just be like, okay, I pledge allegiance to the flag, right? It's your left lung. So if that helps. And that even helps me like in clinical. I'm like, okay, which lung has 2? All right, left lung. So I mean, even I do that. So I mean, if you don't really remember it, but it's helpful later on instead of like feeling, yeah, left and right, or like which one is which. So, and then you have to flip it over for anatomy, right? You have to be like, not your left, it's not my left, it's your left, which is my right. So, yeah, driving is fun. Next one, we're going to talk about membranes. So you have your visceral, you have your pleura, and your pleura is just a membrane either around your lungs or it lines the cavity. And it's just a fancy term for membrane. I don't know how else to say it. So you have your visceral pleura, you have your parietal pleura, and then you have your pleural cavity. And the cavity means it's a space. It's kind of a space between your visceral and your parietal pleura. So the visceral is around your lung, because visceral means organ. So visceral pleura, it lines your organ. Parietal pleura, I don't have a memory hook for, just remember it lines your cavity. And then the cavity is just the space between. So that concludes worksheet number 1. Is there any questions over that? No? Okay. The next one we're going to go over is worksheet number 2, and this is breathing mechanisms. And I'm going to make this to a new one.